Hello, everyone, and welcome today to our Global Supply Chain Intelligence Briefing. Just a few housekeeping items. We have muted everyone's line, and we will just take questions using the chat box on the bottom of your screen to begin the process. So again, thank you all for joining, and I'll take a quick minute to introduce today's speakers. First, we will have David Horlock, the Managing Director for the Asia-Pac region for BSI. Then myself, Courtney Foster. I'm the Supply Chain Solutions Manager, and I will be introducing the intelligence tool to you today. And then finally, we will also have our Global Intelligence Program Manager, Jim Yarborough, who will go over the 2014 Screen Analysis and Report Overview. So again, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the presentation today to review the 2014 Global Intelligence Report by BSI Intelligence Tool. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to David Horlock to do a little introduction for us.
Thank you, Courtney. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is David Horlock. I'm the Managing Director of BSI in Asia Pacific, and I'd like to take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to everyone attending this webinar today to learn about the BSI 2014 Global Supply Chain Intelligence Report. This session will be led by Courtney, who is our Supply Chain Solutions Manager. The BSI Global Intelligence Reports are issued every year to keep our clients informed about their concerns on how supply chain issues covering global sourcing, social responsibility, business continuity, and security can impact on your brand, reputations, or your financial performance. We believe this information will greatly benefit your organization in mitigating risk, enhancing performance, protecting your brand, and help you make excellence a habit. So I'd now like to hand over to Courtney Foster, who will continue with the proceedings. So Courtney, over to you.
Great, thank you, David. And again, I just wanted to take a moment to really give a little bit of background information on where this intelligence comes from and how BSI really derives this intelligence. So the basis and background for the 2014 Global Intelligence Report, the information is derived from our Screen Intelligence Portal. SCREEN stands for Supply Chain Risk Exposure Evaluation Network. And really what that portal is, it's an overall global intelligence portal where we actually report on 20+ risk indicators for supply chain risk. This portal is used by a number of different clients worldwide, and it really is designed to give you that holistic viewpoint of global supply chain risks. SCREEN is a portion of our entire holistic risk management suite of offerings here at BSI Supply Chain Solutions Division. You see a number of those different other offerings here on this screen, such as our audit platform with Supplier Compliance Manager, or our verification offering where we can actually be your eyes and ears on site and doing on-site audits on your behalf, as well as some advisory and training services as well. But today, we're really going to focus on the intelligence tool. And again, SCREEN is a web-based portal for 200+ countries where we actually give incident data on daily incidents of supply chain disruption. We also give short-term qualitative trend forms that happen within a country. So you get full qualitative reports on every country in the world. And then also, we also get maps. So you actually can see the world painted according to what the threat is in that individual country. So we have a 5-panel scale, low to severe, when you can see what is the rating of that country. Is it an elevated risk in Malaysia for human rights disruptions versus maybe a severe risk in Vietnam for that type of disruption? So we do paint the world according to a heat well for a lot of our different risk indicators. So what are those risk indicators? We look at a number of different supply chain related that range from anything from security risk, such as theft, illicit contraband smuggling, sea piracy, counterfeiting. We also look at social risks, so wage rights, fair labor treatment, freedom of association, child labor, women's rights. We also look at environmental risks as well. So what are the rates of pollution in the country, CO2 emissions? What environmental regulations occur in that country that can help prevent environmental degradation? And then the final area I would say is business continuity risk. And business continuity risk allows you to get a better picture on whether or not your business will be disrupted in that country. And if it's disrupted for a number of different reasons. So natural disaster threats, you can see what the threats of floods are, hurricanes, typhoons, whatever natural disaster exists in that country. You also can see man-made disruption for business continuity. So what are the level of labor outages, port strikes, rail strikes? What kind of disruptions to the transportation infrastructure happen because of man-made disruption? And then the final issue, I would say business continuity, is political stability or man-made disruption as it relates to politics and corruption within public service. So you can actually see what type of disruption can happen because of elections or disruptions there. So the last thing I would just say is that's really our holistic viewpoint of where the risk indicators are. And then a lot of companies will ask, well, how do you get that type of intelligence? Where do you derive that intelligence? And that's what this slide here today really portrays is we actually have dedicated in-house intelligence analysts here at BSI that are regionally based. So they are regionally based in pulsing the world for what are the latest and most significant supply chain related trends and threats. And so they are our main source of intelligence and analysis, but they also get feeds of information from a number of different sources as well. So the first major source of information for our analysts are our auditors. So BSI is a global auditing body where we do about 150,000 audits each year in about 150 countries. So using and leveraging our auditors, what they hear and what they find when they're on the ground, that information is fed back to our intelligence analysts for analysis and reporting and qualitative data. Then we also have information from closed source information. So we can actually we have relationships with government intelligence organizations that provide our intelligence group information and feeds of data that they then analyze and quantify for you. Additionally, there's open source data from local news media sources or reports that happened from local police forces. So we do also have that media source of open source data that is fed to our analysts. And obviously there's a filter of validity that happens from the open source data to ensure you're getting the most up-to-date information. And then the final area would just be associations and non-governmental organizations. So we actually get data from different industry groups and different private sector groups where we actually are a member of associations and have a sharing of information clause with them. So collectively, all of those sources, we end up having about 400 to 1,000 incidents of supply chain related disruption analyzed each day. Pretty significant number that our analysts are able to collect and report on. And I think the significant piece of that is that it's not just showing you where the incidents are likely to occur, but also when conditions are primed for heightened concerns. So we're taking some data and making it not reactive, but proactive for you. So you're able to predict where is going to be the next supply chain disruption event. And again, those supply chain disruption events relate to security, social responsibility, business continuity, any type of disruption to the overall supply chain. So I hope that gives you a little bit of background information as to where this intel comes from and how we collect and analyze and report that information for you. So at this time, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, my colleague Jim Yarborough, who is our Global Intelligence Program Manager. And Jim will take you right through the 2014 Global Intelligence Report and Analysis that is derived from this screen tool. So this time, Jim, it's over to you.
Offer insight into what BSI has portrayed in our 2014 Screen Global Intelligence Report. We're going to provide a good overview of the information that's covered in that report. I know that everyone that's registered and attending today's webinar will have an opportunity to obtain that report. You can look at it in greater detail and finer detail at your own leisure following today's presentation. But what I want to do is go over today is give a good high-level overview of the different types of scenarios of risk prediction that Dan was just speaking about, some of the trends we picked up on in 2014, and to give you a bit of an insight in terms of the areas that we do cover in the Screen Intelligence Program. And just taking a look at this quick infographic here, you'll find this available in the report as well. But it gives you a good sense of the scope and the areas around that you can actually find this type of information from the BSI Intelligence Group. So some of the areas that we covered in 2014, if you are a subscriber to the Screen system, you'll know that you are provided this information and this analysis throughout the year. And today we're going to offer that information in terms of a review of 2014. So globally, just looking at some of the trends we picked up on and that we reported on from a Screen perspective around the world. For instance, in Germany, cargo theft. Germany's always been a troublesome area for cargo theft, but you'll see in today's presentation how that threat has actually evolved over time and actually increased in terms of an overall threat. Looking eastward in China, from a social responsibility and environmental concern, that certainly trended upwards last year. As well as you see the acronym UMC, that's unmanifested cargo introduction of illicit materials making their way into the supply chain. We actually saw a very troubling increase in terms of drugs, illicit materials making their way into the supply chain emanating from China in 2014. Over on the other hemisphere, in Chile, for instance, we had an increase in cargo theft. In Colombia, we had a decrease in cargo theft, but we also at the same time saw an increase in counterfeit production and counterfeits making their way through the supply chain and exported from Colombia there. Dominican Republic also saw an increase in drug smuggling into the supply chain. Late 2014 and into early parts of 2015, we've really seen cargo theft take off in Puerto Rico, really elevating up to alarming levels there in that area. And lastly, in Canada, where we saw drug smuggling actually decrease over the year. So as a Screen user, as a BSI partner, you'll have information and access to this type of information throughout the year. Today we're going to do, as I said, a quick overview of that information that we saw in 2014 and an overview of the analysis and information that you'll see within the 2014 Global Intelligence Report. So we're going to break the world up into three large regions. I'm going to start in Asia Pacific. And just to give you a bit of an overview of what we'll cover here, I mentioned the growing illegal drug introduction and cargo shipments in China. We're also going to talk about different modality exposures within the supply chain. So for instance, the air cargo modality threatened at a greater extent in Malaysia now. Cargo theft increasing not only in quantity but also the sophistication of cargo theft in India. We're also looking at sea piracy operations, especially in this region of the world. And again, as I mentioned, the industrial environmental concerns that we'll address in China. So without any further ado, I'm just going to jump into these different areas and give you a quick overview of the different areas that we covered in the report. One of the most disturbing trends that I've seen recently in the years of doing this intelligence work is the growing concern of illicit drugs making their way into the supply chain from China. Now, if you were to ask a typical person on the street, I think, where do drugs most often make their way into the supply chain, or where are they most often smuggled from? I think the first thing that usually comes to mind is South America, Central America, and we're talking about cocaine, marijuana, those type of drugs. But as the acceptance and the wider usage of synthetic drugs becomes more popular around the world, unfortunately, those types of drugs are actually emanating from China in a large degree, and we're seeing a coincidence there of these types of materials making their way into the supply chain from China. So precursor chemicals and finished methamphetamine, synthetic drugs, emanating from China and making their way into the supply chain. So, for instance, in the air cargo modality, we saw a really sharp increase of finished methamphetamines making their way into air cargo, being introduced in China and making their way to Australia and New Zealand. We've pinpointed that Lufeng City, if you see that on the map there in the southeast of China, that's really a hot spot for the production of both the precursor chemicals needed to make these synthetic drugs, but also the finished methamphetamines as well. So we've really drawn an eye to China and really kind of marked that as an area that's really should be a major concern for people when you're looking at where illicit materials are making their way into the supply chain, specifically drugs in this case. China is absolutely becoming one of the world's most problematic spots in that regard. Speaking of methamphetamines and the ways that they're making their way into the supply chain, it really is a global problem, and we're seeing it in other areas around the world. But looking specifically at particular modalities like we do, in particular air cargo in this scenario, we know that in Malaysia that we actually have a really large connection here of drug trafficking organizations actually originating in Nigeria, utilizing the air cargo modality, making its way into Malaysia, and then using Malaysia as a transit point to move these types of drugs throughout the region. So the introduction is actually occurring in Nigeria for the most part, but Malaysia is actually being used as the staging transit area for these drugs, as you see in the map, to make their way again to Australia, but also moving northward through Indonesia, but also northward up to Korea, South Korea, and Japan, to Taiwan and other areas as well. So our data is really reflecting that the air cargo modality especially is very problematic in this area. And again, that's one of the trends we picked up on and reported on, in 2014 to our clientele. Sticking with the security theme in terms of supply chain issues, India unfortunately has also seen a dramatic rise in terms of the threat that we see to the supply chain. In this regard that we're speaking of cargo theft. Again, the quantity has absolutely increased in the country. You can see on the image on the right there, that's our data showing you the locations of cargo theft incidents last year in India. And you can see the darker colors represent the higher density of areas. Unfortunately for India, it's really widespread and it's really across the nation. Obviously a very large nation. You can see a lot of incidents across the entire continent there, the subcontinent of India. But Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta, those are your more troublesome spots of cargo theft. That's where the areas of concern really are in terms of the overall incident density. But what's really surprising to me is how quickly the evolution of cargo theft is really taking hold in India. And that's the sophistication of the cargo theft that we're seeing there. Organized groups operating there, really adopting tactics that we've seen in traditional cargo theft hotbeds, call it Brazil, Mexico, Russia, areas that are, historically known for cargo theft areas. We're seeing that same level of sophistication now take hold in India, where groups are actually using false walls, or excuse me, taking cargo seals, moving the walls of the panels of the trucks, moving there, and not ever breaking the seals, and taking cargo out at predetermined group-controlled warehouses and then replacing that paneling, only to know that these shipments had been stolen from after the shipment arrived to the customer. That's something that we see in South America. That's something we see in Europe. But now we're seeing it being adopted in India as well, too. So the increase in sophistication, what we have detected is that it also has come along with an increase in employee activity involvement in terms of these cargo thefts as well, too. So you can see here just quick data here that we've got early in 2015. You can see that the cargo thefts that we've recorded in India, over 65% of those thefts we know actually involved some employee involved in supply chain operations there as well, too. So much like what we see in Mexico, a quick adoption of infiltrating companies moving high-value goods or highly sought-after goods and using employees within the companies themselves to actually perpetrate these cargo thefts. So the implications there, using this advanced sophistication, I think it really opens the door for not only an increase in cargo theft, but also an increase in smuggling operations, which we may very well see in 2015 and beyond in India as well, too, as the supply chain is further recognized as a cash cow, if you will, for these cargo criminal operations in India. So, for us, we think that, this employee involvement is very alarming. If you have operations, if you have suppliers in India, it's very important to do your due diligence and to understand that the background security checks have been performed for employees as well as contractors there. If you're a screen client, we have access to international laws and regulations all around the world, and in the screen system you can go in there and see that background checks are absolutely permissible by law in India and actually done on a very common basis within the country as well. So we highly encourage taking advantage of that and using that within India. Some other concerns in this region, I do want to point out sea piracy. I know that for years sea piracy was very widely covered by the news media, but mostly in regard to the Somalia area. For a very long time, the waters near Malaysia and Indonesia have been prone to sea piracy attacks as well. Over the years, in recent years, we've seen in Somalia, for instance, the number of incidents and successful incidents of sea piracy really drop off sharply. However, it's important to know that this region is still very active and very dangerous from a sea piracy perspective. It's about 58% of the incidents that we recorded in 2014 were actually in this one region that you're seeing here. Around the world, all sea piracy attacks were actually occurring in that box that you see there on the right. And pirate attacks appear to be conducted by highly sophisticated organizations, but also by opportunists as well. So a lot of high-value goods moving through the area, a lot of oil and petroleum goods obviously are going to be targeted, but also container carriers as well. So the reasons why this area is still problematic versus what we see in Somalia, I think has a lot to do with the countermeasures that are successfully put into place in the areas near Somalia. In Southeast Asia, you're not going to see international levels of cooperation like we saw around the Horn of Africa and in the Somalia area. You're not going to see these large international coalitions. You're not going to see the sharing of information between countries. And you're not going to see a lot of Western naval forces, European, American, whatever, operating in this area. Mostly this is China's sphere of influence, and they're going to be very protective of this area. So I don't think that we're going to see in short order any type of turnaround in the Southeast Asia area for sea piracy like we did in Somalia. So looking forward into 2015, I think this trend will absolutely continue, and certainly something you need to be aware of. Outside of the security areas within this region, looking at some of the more ethical sourcing and social responsibility issues, I did want to touch on industrial air pollution from an environmental concern perspective in China. In 2014, we actually saw for the first time in many years an actual drop in terms of the percentage of GDP spent by the Chinese government to further implement protections and even punishment countermeasures for environmental harm from an industrial perspective in China. Now, in 2015, we've seen issues from the Chinese government that will actually increase this year. So it's a good thing to see that that's actually going to increase again. No surprise, I think, to anyone that China is by far and away the world leader in terms of environmental air pollution concerns from an industrial perspective. During these years where we've seen China actually begin to address from a public standpoint and a public expenditure standpoint, you can actually see over the last 10 years in that chart on the right, we actually do have CO2 emissions dropping throughout the years. When you compare the 2013 numbers to 2004 numbers, there's quite a big drop there. Some of the concerns we have, certainly there are more reports of the government actually being involved and actually punishing companies that are outside of regulations. But of course, when you're dealing with a state-controlled media, you're still dealing with a lot of environmental protests being very quickly shut down. The removal, for instance, of a popular air pollution documentary in China, it appeared on the internet and it was gone within a week. Those are still troubling signs, but we do have other encouraging signs that, yes, the CO2 emissions are dropping off, and yes, China's government is pledging higher dollar numbers than we've seen in years past in terms of combating this. So from a social responsibility, environmental perspective, certainly not anywhere near solving this problem in China, but at least I think we're seeing a lot of public efforts being made there to combat this issue. Moving into another region, another section of the world, we're going to cover three regions now: Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And the areas that we're going to cover today, I mentioned there at the top of the presentation the evolving cargo theft issues in Germany. But we're also going to look at other areas within the supply chain that may be impacting not only business continuity, but the security as well as the integrity of your supply chain throughout the region as well. A lot of that being affected by labor unrest throughout Europe. We're going to look at a couple of things within Africa, increased threat of hijackings in South Africa. We'll look back at the Ebola outbreak, and of course it's still continuing today, and how that actually impacted the supply chain. And then I'm going to touch on conflict minerals. I know a lot of people in attendance today are interested in the Dodd-Frank Act and responding to the Dodd-Frank Act today. And then finally, we're going to look at supply chain terrorism as well. But staying in Europe first, I wanted to discuss the increasing threat of cargo theft in Germany. Very similar to what I spoke about with India, not only in terms of increases in quantity of overall incidents of cargo theft in Germany, but also an evolving state of where cargo thefts are occurring, but also the typical MO that are actually the size of, the MO of how cargo thieves are actually operating within the country as well too. So within Germany itself, looking at where cargo thefts are occurring, traditionally Germany has been a problematic area for cargo theft, and historically where most of the cargo theft has occurred is in the western portion of Germany. Certainly have higher value goods there, a higher operating economy in western Germany, typically than you do in eastern Germany. But as central and eastern Germany economies also catch up, if you will, with western Germany, I think we're seeing a real trend of movement in terms of overall threat within Germany actually shifting beyond not just the western pages, but also to the central German areas as well. So just, going back to that slide, again, the density map that you see there, the green areas are areas where we have concern, yellow more concerning, than red is where a really high density of cargo theft is occurring. So you can see, again, in Germany, in Dusseldorf and Cologne, as well as near Frankfurt, you've got a pretty good heavy concentration of cargo theft. But you can actually see in Munich and other areas in eastern Germany actually starting to pick up as well in terms of the overall number of incidents we're recording there. So the spread of cargo theft incidents to more regions, as I said, those gray areas you see on the left on that map there, the dark gray areas, Again, that's traditionally, historically, where we see the majority of cargo theft occurring. But from 2013 to 2014, we saw that actually diminish. So traditionally, that area was holding about 58% of all of our cargo theft incidents. However, in 2014, that dropped all the way down to about 43%. And we saw Central, Southeast Germany really becoming, equally problematic, and increasingly problematic areas of Germany as well, too. As I mentioned, not only is the location changing within Germany, we're also seeing the MO change a bit within the country as well, too. So moving truck thefts, you see the image you've got there on the left, that's actually becoming more commonplace within Germany now. We saw that previously in areas like Romania and in Italy. It's actually now being commonplace in parts of Germany as well, too. And we're also starting to see large numbers of trailers being broken into at one single rest stop, really kind of underscoring the fact that you've got poor, secure parking facilities within Germany. And it's really problematic in terms of with unsecured parking areas in Germany, you're going to see multitudes of cargo trucks being hit at one time. In fact, we saw that happen multiple times last year. So again, my point is, yes, we have a state, Germany, that has historically been problematic for cargo theft, but even within those areas that are known to be troublesome and problematic, you will see trends change within those areas. You'll see the locations change, the MOs change, even in a lot of cases, the commodity being targeted or the value that's being targeted change within a country as well, too. Moving beyond security issues within Europe, another major disruption factor that we see in the region is labor unrest. And I'm talking about different types of strikes really taking hold that manage to manifest their way into an area, in fact, that will disrupt the movement of cargo and actually can cause not only delays in shipments, but also higher state of concern in terms of cargo theft, smuggling issues. When freight is out of place, when it's all scheduled, bad things happen to freight. And within Europe, we continue to see the disruptions from a business continuity perspective, but also from a, just speaking of labor disruption perspective, it continues to occur at a very high rate. Italy, we see a lot of logistics strikes. Germany, again, logistics, usually airlines, train conductors. France also has a high degree of airline strikes. In Belgium, we see a lot of general labor strikes. We anticipate this will continue as a trend within 2015. What we do understand about this is not only are we seeing numbers of days being disrupted continue to manifest throughout the year within Europe, but it's also interesting to understand why is that happening? Why is labor unrest continue to take hold in Germany when 97% of workers are actually covered by collective bargaining agreements? So it's really interesting to look at this. So, you've got high union membership, you've got high agreement satisfactory there in terms of the collective bargaining arrangements that's taken hold in Europe. But what you do have is smaller and increasingly smaller numbers of activist union members having a greater control over negotiations. And it's really taking root there that you've got these splintered off, smaller size, but more radicalized splinter groups actually controlling operations there. Are negotiations going to break down? Well, we think that's going to increase. That likelihood is going to increase as labor negotiations continue into the future. So it's really interesting if you read the screen reports to understand, yes, we have a strike occurring today, but what is the reasoning behind it, and why is it actually disrupting the supply chain? That kind of information you'll see in the Global Intelligence Report, but you'll also see that on a daily basis being reported to you from the Screen Intelligence portal as well. So moving out of Europe, I want to move over to Africa, and Dan mentioned the predictability of risk when he was speaking earlier. And one of the areas that we covered in last year's intelligence reviews, and we covered in the 2014 Global Report, is an increase in hijackings occurring within South Africa. And again, as I said before, like Germany, like India, South Africa is a known hotspot for hijacking. It's a known hotspot for cargo theft. So it's not it should not be surprising to our screen users that hijackings are occurring in South Africa. But what's interesting to note is the fact that we're seeing, even within a a severe rated state, a very alarming area for hijacking, we're seeing an even greater increase in terms of number of incidents. So you can see in that chart, you've got about in the center of your screen there, the black line is actually number of hijackings, and that's covering the last 10 years of data that we have. But you also can see the red line, which is GDP growth. And you've got a really strong example of how we can be predictable in terms of our risk assessment. And understanding that right now GDP growth is actually declining within South Africa. And as we've seen historically over the last 10 years, generally speaking, when we have a decline or a slowing down of GDP growth, you're going to see a corresponding increase in terms of hijackings in South Africa. So again, back to Dan's point, not only showing you where incidents are occurring, but showing you when conditions are really primed to be alert and have those heightened concerns. And just as we predicted, as the GDP growth slowed and declined in South Africa, sure enough, we saw a very sharp increase in the overall number of hijackings occurring in a country that already experiences very high incident rates of hijackings. Another area of concern within Africa, especially in regard to 2014, was the Ebola outbreak. Now, Ebola very well covered throughout the media for a good portion of the year. I think it's really fallen off the headlines now that we don't have any current Ebola patients in the United States or even in Western Europe, as far as I know. But Ebola is still an ongoing issue in 2014. But what we wanted to do in last year's data and the information that we were portraying in screen was really trying to understand and portray to our clients what is the overall impact of the supply chain from the Ebola outbreak. And if you have access to screen, you have access to the 2014 supply chain impact of Ebola, the report that we have offered in screen. In the report, you were able to see that we had nearly 40 nations that implemented not only travel screens, but also trade restrictions and cargo restrictions that we saw. And it really started to have a domino impact in terms of operations along the supply chain throughout the world. In a lot of areas, if a container or if a ship had docked at port in one of these 39 nations, it was likely to see a very long delay, in some cases a very long delay in terms of actually moving that cargo off ship and onto shore. We think that containment efforts have diminished since the start of 2015, but I do know that in Sierra Leone, for example, Ebola cases continue to pop up, and we have grave concern that there are reasons to further due diligence within these areas. If you have suppliers there, or if you simply have transshipment through the area, that it's possible that we can see these types of disruptions again in 2015 and to see further delays along the supply chain as well. So we do have that report available in the screen system. If anyone is interested in further detail on that, please get in touch with us. I'm sure we can find a way to offer this kind of information along as well. So the conflict minerals and supply chains around the world is what I wanted to talk about next. Within Africa especially, many of you on the call today I know are very interested in this topic, and it's a very timely subject. Just past June 2014, we saw the first deadline for conflict minerals disclosures, mandated, of course, by the Dodd-Frank Act, specifically Section 1502, meaning that was the first time that actual filing under the U.S. conflict minerals legislation was required. We did see about 1,300 companies submit their first disclosure reports indicating whether any of their products contain minerals sourced from these 11 countries you see highlighted in the red here that are covered in the Dodd-Frank Act within Central Africa. What we discovered is that of those 1,300 companies, only about 23% were able to determine that all of their applicable products could be labeled as conflict-free. The vast majority of the rest of the remaining entities were forced to file as conflict undeterminable, meaning that they were required to go back and do further due diligence and further efforts to actually understand whether their minerals were sourced from areas outside of the countries covered by Dodd-Frank Act or not. But what we've picked up on is that not only is Dodd-Frank a major concern and an issue that we all need to be aware of and addressing right away within our supply chain, but other areas of mineral sourcing are actually becoming at the forefront of other further legislation. So, for instance, in the European Union, there's now a proposal to adopt conflict mineral regulations in areas of South America, and that's why we've got those other countries highlighted in the dark gray in Central and South America. We also saw a directive issued just in October from the EU mandating that about 6,000 companies need to disclose information related to their policies of environmental concerns, human rights, working conditions, corruption risks within the companies by 2017. So the takeaway here is really underscoring the wider adoption of responsible sourcing efforts and legislation and regulation from governments, not only here in the United States, but also throughout Europe as well too. So the screen system, the report that you'll have the opportunity to access today will have further detail in terms of this, but you can actually see this becoming a growing concern around the world and really, frankly, just a growing need for wider due diligence and understanding of who your suppliers are and what you're supplying throughout the supply chain. Finally, in the supply chain world, supply chain terrorism, of course, is something that BSI has covered for the last 10 years. We are the only organization that really analyzes when terrorism acts are specifically targeting the supply chain itself, and specifically when terrorist groups not only are targeting the supply chain, but also extorting the supply chain and manipulating suppliers as well as logistic lanes for their betterment and for their further operations. So supply chain terrorism, you can see on the map here, it's not going to follow along the lines of your traditional terrorism models. In fact, you can see here the countries rated, colored in the red color here are where countries that have actually seen supply chains themselves come under direct attack from terrorist groups over the last 10 years. So Chile, Colombia, for example, not really going to be your areas of, that are traditionally covered when you look at CNN or the news media outlets looking at terrorism threats around the world. But what we're looking at is when the supply chain itself becomes the target, when suppliers themselves are intimidated or extorted by terrorist groups. I think a really good area to concentrate on is with the, in 2014, one of the largest terrorism stories, of course, was the Islamic State and ISIS. We have a lot of clients that operate and move pharmaceutical products or high-value goods, say from Jordan or from Israel through and into Iraq. And it's really became problematic for them over 2014 because as ISIS gained further hold of parts of the country, and in fact, you can see the highway, National Freeway 1, pretty much the only way to get into Iraq with a cargo truck from Jordan was very well held by ISIS militants. And not only were they attacking the supply chain, they were very well adept at extorting the supply chain. And I won't go through all of these details here, but you can see in the image on the left there, that's an actual copy of a receipt issued by ISIS for an extortion fee paid by cargo trucks moving along that National Freeway number 1 into Iraq. Basically, every cargo truck moving to that area was forced to actually sign over and hand over additional money for the safe passage into the area. Now, if they were holding something of value that ISIS saw, they were just as likely to steal that cargo or to hijack the truck or to, in a lot of cases, actually kill the truck driver. But to even move that cargo through, you absolutely were forced to pay an extortion fee. And that really rose up in 2014 in Iraq, although we have seen similar extortion tactics being used by terrorist groups like that for years now in other areas of the world, especially in India. This extortion was really taking hold there. So, should this spread to other regions? Absolutely. I think you're going to see Nigeria, which recently just, we saw Boko Haram recently plead allegiance to ISIS. I think you will absolutely see these types of tactics being adopted in other areas of the world where we have these problems of terrorist and militant activity. Boko Haram has already actually been involved in other types of supply chain terrorism incidents in the last several years. And I think we're going to only see that increase further into 2015. Last area we're going to cover are the Americas. We're going to look at some emerging trends again that impact business continuity operations, an evolving cargo theft threat in Argentina, looking at social unrest in Mexico, and finally wrapping up with the U.S. port negotiations out on the West Coast in the United States. So again, looking at not only collecting data and incident reporting of where cargo theft may be occurring or where supply chains may come under threat, it's certainly an invaluable and necessary thing for us to do. But what it allows us to do is really portray greater predictability and analysis for our users in terms of understanding, okay, I've got an area that's of a concern, cargo theft is occurring there, and as you've seen over and over again throughout the presentation, yes, we may identify where problems may occur, but how is that going to change in 2014, or in this case in 2015? And Argentina is a really good example of that, where we've got a good amount of cargo theft actually occurring within the Buenos Aires province in Argentina. But what we've seen is the local government really responding there and creating task forces, creating special police forces to combat that cargo crime. And where it has started is in the northern region of the Buenos Aires municipalities, within Argentina. And as those groups take hold, as their countermeasures are actually effective, you see a real balloon effect. So you squeeze one end of the balloon, and the air is going to push to the other end. That's actually happening now in Argentina, where in the northern region, where special task forces have been established, laws have been implemented, enforcement tactics have been adopted, we're seeing that push of cargo theft operations move to the south and to central Buenos Aires. So certainly something to keep an eye on if you have operations there or suppliers there. That trend will certainly continue. We hopefully will see further adoption of these task forces into other areas. It's great that they're working, but of course there's going to be a residual effect as it works in one area, that crime is going to move into another area. Finally, I'm going to look at Mexico. Mexico is without a doubt one of the most problematic countries in the world in terms of supply chains, not only from a cargo theft and a smuggling perspective. You also have high degrees of drug cartels, organized crime involvement, extortion in the supply chain, corruption in the supply chain. But in 2014, what we saw that was really quite different was social unrest really having a direct impact on the security of supply chains in Mexico. In Guerrero last year, when 43 students went missing, we saw very quickly the adoption of widespread protests within Guerrero. It started off rather peacefully. As the protests grew in size and in scope, it started to spread out to other areas within the country. We very quickly saw a very fast transformation that these protests became violent, especially in regard to supply chains. You can see a lot of good images there of trucks being hijacked, being overturned, being set on fire. The goods that were trying to transit through these protest areas, it started off with a lot of food and water trucks being hijacked in order to feed and water the protesters, but then we saw other goods actually being targeted and given to the families of the 43 students that were missing. The map you see on the right there, we saw that the protests actually moved to other areas of the country and became much more widespread throughout Mexico. And the fact that these protests spread and the adoption of actually impacting the supply chain was replicated throughout the country. In fact, we saw at one point about one truck per day was being hijacked due to these protests alone. So again, another addition, another layer of concern within Mexico, and something we covered in 2014 for our clientele. And finally, we're going to finish up here in the United States. As many of you
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to thank you very much for taking the time to listen to them. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. I hope that you enjoyed all the breakdown of the different intelligence that occurred here today on the webinar. And today now we're going to end. There were a couple questions that came into the chat box that I just wanted to address at this point in time. The first question that came about was, how often is your screen solution updated? That's a really good question, and one we get very often, in fact. And I'll say that the screen solution is updated on a daily basis. It's a constant live feed of information that occurs in the intelligence tool. So what our intelligence analysts do day in, day out is pulse the world, pull in incident data, analyze the data, and report on qualitation, just like you just saw today and what Jim went through and talked through. So it's a live feed of information. The one thing I will note is that the threat ratings for each country don't change daily. They don't change weekly. Those threat ratings that we assign are long-term trends that a country warrants. And often when there is an uptick in activity, it is a very methodical process our analysts go through in order to correct those processes there and correct the threat rating. But more often we are actually correct with our threat rating when an incident occurs. We look at our ratings and we know, yep, we got that one right. And then the last question we'll just finish off in essence of time today that came in is, how does my organization get access to this intelligence? And access to the intelligence, we said this is actually an intelligence portal tool that is offered commercially to the industry. And it's called the Screen Intelligence Tool. So getting access to it would be just contacting us using the email address on this contact screen. So you can email that address if you're interested in getting access to the intelligence portal. Essentially, it's just a small fee for the user access license. So it's a per user license that you get access to. And we'll be more than happy to support that process in order to help you get access to the tool. So again, I did want to thank you for taking the time to join us today for the 2014 Screen Global Intelligence Report release. We will be following up following this webinar with you all to provide the actual report to you so you can have a soft copy of the report. So I hope you all have enjoyed the information provided, and feel free to reach out with any questions you have. Otherwise, I wish you all a good day and goodbye.